My name is Eleanor Whitman, and at 58, I thought I understood motherhood. I thought sacrifice and devotion were enough. I thought that if I poured myself into my children, the love I gave would eventually return. But on an ordinary Wednesday morning, one careless word from my daughter shattered that illusion forever. The day began beautifully, as so many of my days did in the quiet suburb where I lived. Sunlight streamed through the bay windows of my Tudor-style home, catching the edge of a Waterford crystal vase filled with fresh white peonies. That vase had been a gift from my late husband Robert on our 20th anniversary. Even 3 years after his passing, I still polished it carefully, as if keeping it shining meant I was honoring him, keeping a piece of him alive in this house. I moved gracefully from one room to the next, the way a woman does when her home is her kingdom. My friends used to joke that I could have been an interior designer, every pillow placed just so every photo frame polished. Order gave me peace, and beauty gave me strength. On that morning, I had no reason to believe anything would disturb the serenity I had so carefully built. Then my phone rang. It was Emily, my only daughter, 28, and radiant with the kind of beauty that comes effortlessly with youth. I had spent the past 8 months planning what was supposed to be the wedding of the Centuria $65,000 celebration at the same country club where Robert and I had married. Every detail had been chosen with love. The imported roses, the hand-lettered invitations, the symphony quartet I'd arranged to fly in from New York. It wasn't just a wedding. It was my gift to her, the way I told her she was cherished. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said warmly. "How are the dress fittings going?" Her tone was sharp, impatient. "Mom, we need to talk. It's about the guest list." I set down my pen, frowning only slightly. "Of course, darling. What's the problem?" "You invited the Bensons," she said flatly. I blinked. The Bensons had been family friends for 3 decades. Dorothy Benson had held Emily at her baptism, sent her birthday cards every year, and baked her favorite cookies when she got into college. "Yes, I thought it would be meaningful, Dorothy." "Uninvite them," Emily interrupted. "Daniel doesn't like them. He says they're boring, and honestly, I agree. This wedding is supposed to be fun, not some old folks gathering." Before we dive into family betrayal stories, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Hearing from people around the world makes these stories even more powerful and reminds us how connected we all are. The words hit me like ice water. I steadied my voice. "Emily, these are people who have loved you your entire life. They matter. Dorothy was at your graduation, your confirmation. Mom, stop being such a pest about this. It's my wedding, not yours." Pest. The word rang in my ears harsh and ugly, as if she had swatted me away like an insect. I had spent years stitching together her happiness, and in a single breath she reduced me to a nuisance. "Emily," I whispered, "I think you're being unreasonable." Her laugh was sharp, bitter. "You always do thistry to control everything. You can't just let me have what I want without making it about you and your old friends." I sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the vase of peonies. Suddenly their petals looked too fragile, too white, as though they might collapse under the weight of her words. "Emily," I said softly, "I love you. I only want what's best for you." "Then prove it. Stay out of my way." And she hung up. For a long moment I sat in silence, the kind of silence that isn't peaceful but hollow, echoing. I thought about every check I had written, every late night spent balancing wedding invoices, every corner of my life I had given to make hers more beautiful. And in return, I was a pest. An hour later, my son Michael called. At 30, he was the golden boy, Harvard-educated, a rising attorney at a prestigious firm living in the house I owned, and let him use rent-free. He had Robert's dark hair and my blue eyes, the kind of smile that could charm anyone. "Hey, Mom," he said casually. "Emily told me about the fight. Look, I think you should just apologize. She's under a lot of stress." "She called me a pest, Michael." "Come on, you know how brides get. Just say you're sorry and let her handle the guest list." The mature thing I said carefully would have been for her to show respect. "And if I don't apologize," his tone cooled, "then I'd rather lose my mother than lose my sister." The words sliced clean through me. Lose his mother, me, the woman who had given up her career, her dreams, her very sense of self to raise him. I whispered, "I see." In that moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't heartbreak. I had known heartbreak when Robert passed. No, this was different. This was the sound of a rope snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. For 30 years, I had built my children's lives as carefully as I arranged the flowers in my crystal vase, and in return they saw me not as the foundation but as a burden. I set down my phone. My hands no longer trembled. For the first time in decades, I felt something strange and powerful flood my chest clarity. If they thought I was a pest, then perhaps it was time they learned what life without this pest looked like. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. I looked again at the vase of peonies still standing tall, still radiant despite their fragility. They reminded me of Robert's words, "You're stronger than you think, Eleanor." I straightened my back, took a slow breath, and whispered into the quiet house, "So be it." And that was the moment my story truly began. When the house finally went quiet that morning, I found myself walking from room to room as if I were searching for Robert's voice. He wasn't there, of course. 3 years had passed since cancer stole him from me, but in moments like this, I still half expected to hear his steady baritone telling me to breathe, to take things one step at a time. Instead, all I could hear were echoes of Emily's sharp pest of Michael's cold, "I'd rather lose my mother." Their words clung to the walls like smoke. And yet beneath the sting, another truth whispered, "This didn't happen overnight. I had trained them for this." It started small, as these things often do. When Emily was in middle school and forgot her science project until the night before, I stayed up until 3 in the morning, gluing foam planets while she slept soundly in her bed. She got an A. The teacher told me she was brilliant, and I smiled, too tired to admit whose hands had really earned the grade. In high school, when Michael totaled his first car, I wrote a check the next day and told him everyone makes mistakes. "You'll do better next time," I said, kissing his bruised forehead. And he did drive more carefully for a while. But deep down, he learned something else. When life broke, Mom would fix it. College was the same story in bigger numbers. Emily wanted a semester abroad in Paris. I drained part of my retirement fund because I couldn't bear to see disappointment in her eyes. Michael set his sights on Harvard Law. He had the brains, yes, but not the scholarships. So I signed loan documents guaranteeing his future with my signature. He walked across that stage in crimson robes. I clapped the loudest, though my bank account wept quietly in the background. Every time I said yes, I told myself it was love. "Isn't that what parents do? Sacrifice?" Robert used to caution me, "Eleanor, they need to learn the value of struggle. Don't hand them everything." He would shake his head when I slipped Emily $100 for new shoes, or when I quietly paid Michael's overdue parking tickets. I always brushed him off. "They'll grow out of it," I insisted. "Gratitude comes later." But gratitude never came, only bigger requests. After Robert died, the requests multiplied like weeds in an untended garden. Perhaps they sensed my loneliness. Perhaps they assumed I needed purpose. Either way, they leaned harder. Michael moved into the Harrison Street house temporarily, and 3 years later was still there, paying nothing, calling it home base. Emily discovered a taste for designer clothes boutique jobs that covered little more than coffee and a fiancé whose champagne tastes far outpaced his beer budget. And I kept writing checks, house taxes, insurance premiums, wedding deposits, always saying yes, always convincing myself that this was what love looked like. Until yesterday. I leaned against the marble counter, staring at the bills stacked neatly in their leather binder. My handwriting filled every line: tuition, rent, utilities, car notes, florist invoices, a ledger of devotion. But also, if I was honest, a ledger of enabling. For 20 years I had been their safety net. Every stumble, every whim, every oversight, my wallet stretched beneath them, catching them before they could feel the ground. I had meant it as protection. But perhaps what I had built was a trap. Because when a net is always there, you stop learning how to balance on your own feet. The realization pressed heavy on my chest, but it also burned with clarity. Emily's pest and Michael's ultimatum hadn't come from nowhere. They were the natural harvest of seeds I had sown, seeds of indulgence, of rescue, of endless yes. I walked into Robert's old study, the room that still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and cedar. His books lined the shelves: law, history, philosophy. He had always believed in accountability, in earning your keep. Standing there, I could almost hear him. "Eleanor, love them enough to stop. Let them fall. Let them climb." I pressed my palm against his desk, cool and steady beneath my hand. "You were right," I whispered into the emptiness. "And now I have to fix it, even if it breaks me first." In the kitchen, the vase of peonies still glowed in the morning light. Their stems were cut short, carefully arranged, beautiful for now, but destined to wither within days. Beauty without roots never lasts. Neither does a family without gratitude. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down with a yellow legal pad. At the top, in bold letters, I wrote, boundaries. For the first time in decades, I would stop cushioning every fall. No more blank checks, no more silent rescues. Love was not meant to be an endless supply line. It was meant to be a garden cultivated with care, balanced between giving and growing. And so, as the clock ticked softly on the wall, I began to sketch the outlines of a new planet of revenge, but of redefinition. A plan where my children would finally discover what it meant to stand on their own 2 feet. They might hate me for it. They might curse my name. But maybe, just maybe, one day they would thank me. For 20 years, I had been the mother of yes. It was time to learn the power of no. By the next morning, the decision no longer felt like a storm of emotions. It felt like calm after thunder. For the first time in years, I woke without that anxious list running in my head. What bill to pay, what deadline to meet, what favor to grant. Instead, I heard Robert's voice steady and clear. If you love them, Eleanor, teach them responsibility. I poured coffee into my favorite mug and opened the yellow legal pad I had scribbled on the night before. The word, "at the top boundaries," stared back at me like a contract waiting to be signed. My hand no longer trembled. The first call I made was to Rachel Cooper, the wedding planner. She answered in her usual chipper tone, already ready to update me on floral shipments and seating charts. "Rachel," I said gently, "I need you to cancel everything." A pause. Everything. Yes, the venue, the flowers, the quartet, the photographer, all of it. "Mrs. Whitman, the deposits. I understand. Cancel them anyway. If Emily has questions, please refer her to me." There was another pause, then a professional but subdued "yes, ma'am." When I hung up, I half expected panic to rise. But instead, a strange lightness filled me. One heavy stone removed from my shoulders. The next call was to Paul Johnson, my property manager. "Paul, I need you to issue a 30-day notice on the Harrison Street house. Yes, Michael's been living there. Effective immediately." Paul hesitated. "Are you sure, Eleanor, he's your son?" "I'm sure," I replied firmly. "It's time he learned what rent feels like." By mid-morning, I had spoken with my insurance company to remove Michael's car from my policy. I also called the bank about restructuring the trust fund distribution schedule. The law allowed me discretion, and I intended to use it. Not to punish, but to protect, to stop pouring good money into bad habits. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me. Each call, each decision felt like snipping away threads that had bound me to a role I no longer recognized. I wasn't the eternal rescuer. I was a woman learning to respect herself and teaching her children to do the same. Around noon, my phone buzzed with Emily's name. I let it ring twice before answering. "Mom, what did you do? Rachel says the wedding is canceled." "Yes, dear, it is." "You can't just destroy everything," she shrieked. "I didn't destroy it, Emily. I simply stopped paying for it. If you and Daniel want a wedding, you're free to plan one on your own terms with your own resources." Her voice cracked. "We can't afford that." "You promised." "I promised, love," I said softly. "Not endless funding." There was silence, then a sob, then the click of her hanging up. An hour later, it was Michael pounding on my front door, his face flushed with anger. "Mom, you evicted me." 30 days. What am I supposed to do? Find a place within your means. Millions of people your age do it every day. This is insane. I've been working 12-hour days at the firm, and now you'll work 12 hours and still pay your own rent. That's called adulthood. He stared at me, his jaw tight, as if waiting for me to relent. When I didn't, his shoulders slumped. "You're serious." As serious as I should have been 20 years ago. That night, I sat alone in the quiet of Robert's study, sipping tea. I thought about how easily I could have caved, how natural it had always been to fix, to fund, to rescue. But this time, I hadn't. And though my children were furious, though their cries still echoed in my ears, I knew this was the right choice. For too long, love in our family had meant dependency. Today, I began teaching them a new definition. Love meant boundaries. The morning after I drew the line, I returned to my yoga mat. The soft stretch of my body, the rhythm of breath in and out felt almost ceremonial. For years I had moved through these poses with tension humming beneath my skin. But today each posture carried a different weight, resolve. Halfway through my sun salutations, I heard the first scream. Through the bay window, I saw Emily in my driveway, still in pajamas, hair wild phone clutched in her hand. She was pacing, shouting into the morning air. Even from inside, I could hear her voice break as she cried. She canceled everything. My phone lit up with her name. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Good morning, sweetheart," I said calmly, as if nothing in the world was amiss. "Mom," she shrieked, "tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't cancel my wedding." I moved to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and replied evenly, "It's true. The wedding is postponed until you and Daniel are ready to pay for it yourselves. You can't do this to me. Her voice cracked like glass. Daniel's parents are furious. He's humiliated. Do you realize what you've done? Yes, I said softly. I've given you the chance to build a life on your own terms. That's what marriage should be, two people standing together without a safety net. There was silence on the other end, then sobbing, then the click of the call ending. I set the phone down. For a moment, my chest ached with the memory of the little girl who used to curl in my lap after bad dreams. But the ache was tempered by truth. That little girl had grown into a woman who called her mother a pest. And this mother could no longer carry her. By afternoon, it was Michael's turn. I heard the slam of a car door, his followed by heavy pounding on my front door. When I opened it, he stood there, face flushed with anger. 30 days. Are you serious, Mom? You just had Paul serve me with an eviction notice like I'm some tenant off the street. You are a tenant, I said quietly. You've been living in that house rent-free for 3 years. It's time to stand on your own feet. I've been working 12-hour days at the firm. You know how hard it is to build a career in law. And now you'll know how hard it is to balance a career with paying your own rent. That's called adulthood, Michael. His eyes narrowed. This isn't about adulthood. This is about you being vindictive because Emily hurt your feelings. The accusation stung, but I didn't let it show. No, I said steady. This is about me finally correcting 20 years of mistakes. Mistakes that taught you both entitlement instead of gratitude. He took a step closer, lowering his voice like a warning. If you think I'll forgive this, I'm not asking for forgiveness, I interrupted. I'm asking for respect. And until you learn what that word means, you'll get neither comfort nor convenience from me. For a moment, he just stared at me, breathing hard. Then his shoulders sagged. He looked younger somehow, almost like the boy who once cried when his toy broke. Only this time there was no mother rushing to fix it. 30 days, he muttered, turning away. Yes, I said softly, use them wisely. That evening I sat in Robert's study, the eviction notice and wedding invoices stacked neatly on the desk. Outside, the sun dipped low, painting the garden in shades of amber. The phone buzzed again and again. Emily's name, Michael's, even Daniel Carter's. I didn't answer. I thought of all the nights I'd rushed to solve their crises, the tuition deadlines, the overdue bills, the broken cars. And I realized that every rescue had stolen from them the very thing they needed most: resilience. Now, watching their worlds wobble without my scaffolding, I felt both sorrow and certainty. They thought I was cruel. Perhaps they even hated me, but I knew the truth. This wasn't cruelty. This was the first lesson. And like all lessons worth learning, it came with pain. The week after I drew the line, the silence in my home grew thicker. My phone still lit up with missed calls and desperate texts, but I left them unanswered. I had spent too many years responding instantly to every need. Now their emergencies were no longer mine to solve. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Emily's unraveling began on a Tuesday afternoon. She stormed into the boutique where she worked part-time, mascara-smudged voice trembling. Her manager, Lisa Adams, later told me in confidence what happened. Emily arrived 40 minutes late, complaining that Daniel was furious, his parents humiliated, and the wedding vendors calling nonstop for overdue balances. When a customer questioned the price of a silk scarf, Emily snapped, "If you can't afford it, don't waste my time," she barked. The customer left, offended. Lisa pulled Emily aside, reminding her that retail required patience. But Emily, who had never balanced a real budget in her life, was drowning in bills she had assumed I would pay. That night, I saw her car parked outside my house. She sat inside for nearly an hour, engine-running headlights washing across my garden. She didn't knock. Maybe pride held her back. Maybe fear. When she finally drove away, I whispered a prayer into the darkness. Lord, let her find her own strength. Michael's struggle looked different but carried the same weight. He called me one morning from the courthouse parking lot, his voice tight. "Mom, my car was repossessed. They just towed it, in front of everyone." I closed my eyes, remembering the payments I had quietly made month after month. "Then maybe it's time for public transit, Michael. You don't understand. I have hearings across town, meetings that run late." "I understand perfectly. I managed a career, a household, and 2 children without anyone paying my way. You're smart. You'll figure it out." There was a long pause, then a broken laugh. "You're really going to let me fail?" "No," I said gently. "I'm going to let you learn." That evening, a neighbor mentioned seeing Michael walking in the rain suit jacket, over his head, briefcase dripping. My heart clenched, but I forced myself to stay still. Protecting him from discomfort had created this dependency. If I stepped in now, the lesson would vanish. By the end of the week, the siblings turned on each other. Emily called Michael, demanding he talk sense into Mom. Michael snapped that he had his own crisis. "I'm about to lose my apartment, Emily. I can't even keep a car on the road, and you're crying about flowers." At least that's what I heard later when their argument spilled onto social media. A friend showed me screenshots, Emily accusing Michael of being selfish, Michael accusing Emily of being spoiled. Their carefully polished images, Harvard lawyer, stylish bride-to-be, were beginning to crumble. For years I had shielded them from this exact exposure. Paid bills before landlords called wired money, before creditors noticed fixed mistakes before they could stain reputations. Now, without my intervention, the world saw what I had hidden: two adults who had never learned to carry their own weight. On Friday evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat in Robert's study, a journal open in my lap. I listed everything they were facing. Emily bills piling up, boutique job in jeopardy, engagement strained. Michael eviction notice, no car performance slipping at work. Each line was a consequence not of my cruelty, but of choices long delayed. For once, the ledger didn't hold my handwriting at the bottom. I thought of Robert again. They'll never grow strong if you never let them strain. Perhaps this was the strain they needed. That night, my phone rang again, Emily this time. I let it go to voicemail. Her voice was raw. "Mom, please, I can't do this. Daniel says we need to scale back the wedding, but his parents think I look irresponsible. Everyone's whispering that I've lost it. I need you. Please, just this once more." I held the phone in my hand long after the message ended. Tears pricked my eyes, but I didn't call back. I set the phone down, whispered a quiet prayer for her, and returned to my journal. It wasn't revenge, it wasn't punishment. It was life finally allowed to teach them what I never had. And though it broke my heart to watch them stumble, I knew it was the only way they'd ever learn to walk. The second week of silence was the hardest, not for Emily or Michael, though I knew they were struggling, but for me. A mother's instinct is to rush in, to fix, to soften the blows. Each time my phone buzzed with a new voicemail, Emily sobbing, Michael cursing the universe, I had to sit on my hands to keep from answering. But in that silence, something unexpected emerged: clarity. If cutting them off was the first step, then I needed the second. I couldn't just leave them drifting. Boundaries without direction could turn into bitterness. What they needed now was structure, a chance to prove to themselves that adulthood wasn't an enemy, but a teacher. So one evening in Robert's old study, I opened my leather-bound planner and wrote at the top of a fresh page, the Whitman 90-day plan. Step 1, housing. Michael would move out of the Harrison Street house by the end of the month. I decided I wouldn't leave him entirely stranded. Instead, I connected with Paul Johnson, my property manager, to compile a list of modest apartments around town places within walking distance to public transit. I circled 3 that were decent, but not luxurious. If Michael wanted stability, he could choose one. If not, the consequences would be his alone. Step 2, employment. Emily's part-time boutique job was a Band-Aid, not a career. I had spent years hoping she'd chase her real passions, design, teaching anything that required effort. Now she would have to. Through a friend at church, I heard of an opening for a receptionist at a local dental office. Not glamorous, but steady hours, steady pay. It would force her to wake up on time, manage schedules, and interact with people outside her social bubble. I wrote it down. Step 3, money. I listed their monthly expenses on one page: rent, food, transportation, utilities. Then I drew a budget based on what they could realistically earn. For the first time, the numbers weren't cushioned by my checkbook. The totals were tight, sometimes painfully so, but they balanced. At the bottom I wrote, no debt, no luxuries, no rescues. Step 4, accountability. This was the part that mattered most. Every Sunday for the next 90 days, they would come to my house, not for dinner, not for handouts, but for accountability. We would sit in Robert's study with the door closed, and they would show me proof rent receipts, pay stubs, schedules. Not to shame them, but to remind them that responsibility is measured, not assumed. I leaned back in Robert's chair, staring at the plan. For the first time, I didn't feel like a villain plotting against my children. I felt like a teacher writing a syllabus. The next morning, I invited them both to the house. They arrived stiff and guarded, Emily clutching a tissue, Michael's jaw set tight. "Before you say anything," I began, "I need you both to listen. I am not here to fight. I am here to give you a path." Emily's eyes were swollen from crying. "A path, Mom? You've ruined everything. Daniel's family thinks I'm unstable. I lost my job. And I'm facing eviction," Michael added bitterly. I folded my hands on the desk. Yes, those are the consequences of living without boundaries. But here's what you need to know. I am not abandoning you. I am giving you 90 days. 90 days to learn to adjust, to grow." They exchanged wary glances. I slid the planner across the desk. "This is your plan. Housing, work, money, accountability. It's not negotiable. You will live within your means. You will show up every week with proof. And at the end of 90 days, if you've shown responsibility, then we will talk about rebuilding trust." Emily sniffled. "And if we fail, then you fail. And you will live with that failure until you choose differently. But you will not drag me down with you again." Michael leaned back, arms crossed. "This is insane. You're treating us like kids." "No," I said firmly. "I'm treating you like adults who've never learned how to be adults. This is your chance to change that." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Emily's shoulders sagged. 90 days, she whispered almost to herself. "Yes," I said softly. 90 days. To prove you can stand on your own 2 feet. To prove Robert and I didn't raise you in vain." I closed the planner, the sound crisp and final. Take it or leave it. But understand this, the old life is gone. This is the only path forward. They didn't thank me. They didn't hug me. They left the house in silence. But as the door closed behind them, I felt something shift in the air. For the first time, the weight was no longer mine alone to carry. The first Sunday of our 90-day plan arrived sooner than I expected. I had spent the week resisting every urge to check on Emily or Michael. My planner sat open on Robert's desk, waiting for the evidence they were supposed to bring. I wasn't sure if they'd show up at all. At exactly 2 o'clock, the front door creaked open. Emily stepped in first. Her usual glamorous style had faded. Today she wore simple jeans and a cardigan, her hair pulled into a ponytail that looked more practical than polished. Behind her came Michael's suit jacket, wrinkled dark circles under his eyes. They didn't look like children anymore. They looked like people carrying weight they'd never known before. "Sit," I said, gently motioning to the 2 chairs across from me. Emily clutched her purse like it might anchor her. "I got a job," she blurted out before I could speak. "At Dr. Wallace's dental office, front desk." I blinked in surprise. That had been one of the opportunities I'd written in the plan, but I hadn't expected her to act so quickly. "When did you start?" "When did you?" "Wednesday. The pay isn't great, but it's steady. I even had to set an alarm for 7. Daniel laughed at me. Her voice trembled, and I could tell the laughter hadn't felt kind. I leaned forward. "Emily, that's progress. It may not be glamorous, but it's work. Work brings dignity." She nodded, but her eyes were glassy. "Mom, people actually thank me when I answer the phone. Like it matters that I'm there. I never thought—" She trailed off, blinking fast. I wrote it down in the planner, Emily. Employed. 5 days. Punctuality required. Then I turned to Michael. He shifted uncomfortably. "I moved out," he said. "And I'm renting a 2-bedroom with a guy from the firm. He's younger, still studying for the bar. Place is tiny. Walls are paper thin, but it's close to the subway. Did you sign the lease?" He slid a folded paper across the desk. I opened it. His name, not mine, sat on the dotted line. My throat tightened, but I forced myself to keep steady. "Well done." He exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding his breath all week. "It's not much, Mom. I had to sell a few things just to cover the deposit. And commuting without a car—" He shook his head. "Yesterday I walked 2 miles in the rain. I ruined my shoes." For the first time in years, I didn't offer to buy him new ones. Instead, I asked, "And did you survive?" He glared at me for a moment, then let out a short, rueful laugh. "Barely, but yes." I wrote again, Michael, signed lease, adjusting to commute, learning discomfort. For a while, the 3 of us sat in silence. The kind of silence that used to feel heavy, but now felt like soil being turned ready for something new to grow. Finally, Emily spoke. "Daniel's been distant. He keeps asking when you'll change your mind, when things will go back to normal." I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my tone calm. Things will never go back to normal. If Daniel can't handle the real Emily-own who works budgets and grows, then maybe he doesn't deserve you. Tears slid down her cheeks. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." "You are," I said firmly. "Strength isn't loud. It's waking up every morning and doing what's hard. You're stronger than you think." Michael rubbed his temples. At work, people noticed. They asked if everything was okay because I looked exhausted. I almost told them the truth that I'd been spoiled, that I'd never paid rent until now. But I bit my tongue. "That's another lesson," I said softly. "Humility. Let the struggle refine you, not define you." When the session ended, they stood awkwardly as if unsure whether to hug me. For years, our meetings had ended with me pressing checks into their hands. Now all I gave them was a nod of approval. As they left, I lingered at the window, watching Emily's small sedan pull out of the driveway. For the first time, she checked her mirrors, careful, deliberate. Michael walked with a straighter spine than when he'd arrived. It was only the first week. They were still angry, still raw, still resistant. But a seed had been planted. And if I had learned anything from Robert's garden, it was this: even the smallest seed, when tended by truth and time, could become something strong enough to weather storms. By the second Sunday, the strain was written all over their faces. Emily's eyes were swollen, as if she hadn't slept in days. Michael carried himself stiffly, his tie, crooked his briefcase worn at the corners. I invited them in the same way I had the week before. Robert's study had begun to feel like a courtroom, each meeting a hearing where the evidence of their lives was laid bare. Emily spoke first. "Daniel moved out," she whispered, her voice barely more than air. The words hit me like the stone. "Moved out." She nodded, twisting a tissue in her hands. "He said he didn't sign up for this. He wanted the wedding, the big house, the safety net. He said, without your money, I'm not the woman he thought I was." Silence pressed heavy between us. For a moment, I saw her at 6 years old, clutching her teddy bear after her first scraped knee, crying that the world wasn't fair. Only now the wound was deeper. "Emily," I said gently, "he didn't leave because of you. He left because of his own weakness. He wanted comfort, not commitment." Her tears spilled freely. I thought he loved me. Maybe he loved the version of you who never had to struggle. But that's not love, it's convenience. Now you get to find out who will love you for real. She wiped her cheeks, breathing shakily. "I don't even know who I am without all of this. Without you fixing everything." "Then this is the beginning," I told her, "not the end." Michael cleared his throat, shifting in his chair. "Well, my week wasn't much better. I made a mistake at the firm. Missed a filing deadline. Harrison chewed me out in front of the whole team." My stomach tightened. What happened? "I was late to the courthouse. Subway delays, rain, everything piled up. And without a car, I couldn't make it in time." He rubbed his eyes. I've never seen him so angry. He said if it happens again, my future here could be in jeopardy. I wanted to scream, to march into that firm and remind Harrison Reynolds that my son was brilliant, that one mistake shouldn't outweigh years of potential. But I swallowed the urge. That was the old Eleanor. If you're still watching, comment 1, so I know you're still with me. "What did you do after he scolded you?" I asked. Michael let out a bitter laugh. "What do you think? I sat in the bathroom for 15 minutes trying not to throw up. Then I went back to my desk and finished the brief. That I said firmly is resilience. You didn't quit. You didn't run. You stayed." He looked up at me, surprise flickering in his eyes. "Michael," I continued, "this isn't about the subway or the rain. It's about preparation. Next time, leave earlier. Carry an umbrella. Keep an extra pair of shoes at the office. Struggle teaches you to think ahead." He leaned back, exhausted. "I don't know how much more of this I can take, Mom." "You'll take as much as it requires, because that's life, and for the first time you're living it without a cushion." For a while none of us spoke. The ticking of Robert's old clock filled the silence, steady and relentless. Emily broke it at last. "Everyone's talking about me. Daniel's mother told people at church that I'm unstable. I can feel them staring at me like I'm broken." I reached across the desk, placing my hand over hers. "Let them talk. Their words don't define you. Your actions do." Michael gave a short, humorless laugh. "Easy for you to say. Everyone still respects you." "They respect me," I said quietly, because I faced loss and kept standing. Because when Robert died, I didn't collapse. I built a life. You can do the same." Emily whispered. "But what if we can't?" "Then you'll fall," I answered, "and you'll get up again. That's the only way forward." When they finally left, I stood by the window watching them walk to the car together. Emily leaned on Michael's arm, fragile but still moving. Michael carried her purse without complaint, his usual arrogance stripped away. They were breaking, yes, but sometimes things had to break before they could be rebuilt. I closed the planner, writing 2 words across the page. Progress hurts. And I prayed that in the rubble of their old lives, my children might finally discover the strength they had buried for so long. By the 3rd Sunday, I half expected them not to show. After all, the last week had been brutal. Emily abandoned by Daniel, Michael humiliated at work. I wouldn't have blamed them for hiding. But at exactly 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, I saw something different. Emily and Michael stood side by side, neither looking polished, but both looking steadier. Emily's hair was tied back neatly, her blouse pressed her posture straighter. Michael still had dark circles under his eyes, but his tie was tightened properly. His shoes shined despite the scuffs. They walked in together like a pair of soldiers who'd survived the same battle. We settled into Robert's study, the planner open before me. Emily spoke first. I made it through my first full week at the dental office. There was a flicker of pride in her voice, tentative but real. "How did it go?" I asked. She bit her lip, then smiled faintly. "Better than I thought. I'm learning the software for scheduling patients. Dr. Wallace said I'm catching on quickly, and one of the patients told me I had a reassuring voice." Her cheeks flushed as she said it, as if the compliment meant more than she'd expected. "That's wonderful, Emily," I said. "Do you see now, work may not be glamorous, but it builds something no amount of money can buy: confidence." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I felt useful, Mom. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I mattered." Michael leaned forward next. "I left the house an hour earlier every day this week. No more excuses. I kept extra clothes in my office like you suggested. And on Friday—" He hesitated, then allowed himself a small grin. "On Friday, Harrison complimented me, said I handled pressure better than expected." Pride swelled in my chest. "That's progress, Michael." He shrugged, but I could see the spark in his eyes. "I won't lie. It's hard. Living with a roommate, budgeting every dollar. Yesterday I turned down a dinner invitation because I couldn't justify the cost. That hurt. But it also felt like control for once." I wrote in the planner, Emily steady employment, Michael professional resilience. For a while we sat quietly, the old clock ticking. Then Emily reached for Michael's hand. "He's been helping me, Mom," she said softly. "Driving me when my car acts up. Talking me through the panic when Daniel's name pops up on my phone." Michael squeezed her hand, his expression serious. "She's been helping me too. She made me dinner twice this week. Real food, not just takeout. It felt normal, like family." I looked at them, me two children, who had spent years bickering, competing, taking for granted not just me but each other. And now here they were, finding strength in the very place they had once ignored one another. "Do you know what this is?" I asked quietly. They looked at me puzzled. "This is what I prayed for all those years you thought I was just writing checks. Not your wealth, not your success, but your bond. Family isn't measured in weddings or houses or cars. It's measured in whether you show up for each other when everything falls apart." Emily's chin quivered. Michael blinked rapidly, his jaw tight. Finally, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom, for calling you a pest, for everything. I didn't understand." Michael added, his voice low but steady. "Me too. I thought I was protecting Emily, but really, I was protecting the comfort you gave us. I never stood up for you. I should have." Tears pricked my eyes. For weeks I had steeled myself, determined not to let their apologies sway me if they weren't sincere. But in this moment I felt something shift. Their words weren't excuses. They were admissions. Honest, raw, and earned through hardship. When they left that afternoon, I stood at the window again, watching Emily climb into her little sedan while Michael held the door for her. For the first time, they didn't look like entitled children scrambling for rescue. They looked like adults. Adults beginning to carry their own weight. Adults leaning not on my checkbook but on each other. As the car disappeared down the street, I whispered into the quiet house, "Thank you, Robert. They're learning." And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, my children were finally on their way to becoming the people we had always hoped they could be. The house was quiet again after Emily and Michael left, but the silence felt different now. Not heavy, not suffocating, simply peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for the next emergency call, the next demand, the next sacrifice. Instead, I found myself listening to the hum of life around me. The tick of the grandfather clock, the rustle of leaves in the garden, even the faint laughter of neighborhood children carried on the breeze. It struck me then I had been so consumed with holding my children together that I had forgotten what it meant to hold myself. The next morning I brewed coffee and carried my cup to the back porch. The garden Robert and I had planted stretched before me, overgrown in places but still beautiful. Roses bloomed in stubborn bursts of color, even where weeds crept near their roots. I smiled. Perhaps there was a lesson in that. Later that week, I accepted an invitation I might once have ignored. Dorothy Benson, an old friend from church, had been asking me to join her book club for years. I had always declined claiming busyness, though the truth was, I couldn't bear to spend an evening on anything that didn't revolve around Emily or Michael. This time I said yes. Walking into Dorothy's living room felt strange at first, like stepping into a world I had long abandoned. Women my age sat in a circle with cups of tea, laughing and debating the novel of the month. They welcomed me warmly, not as Emily's mother or Michael's benefactor, but simply as Eleanor. When it was my turn to share, I hesitated. Then, surprising even myself, I spoke honestly. It's been a season of change for me. I'm learning to let go of control, to stop rescuing, and to start living again. The room went quiet. Then Dorothy reached over, squeezing my hand. That's not easy, Eleanor, but it's brave. For the rest of the evening, I listened more than I spoke. I laughed at their stories, nodded at their struggles, and for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged somewhere outside my own family drama. On Saturday, I visited the farmers market downtown. The stalls overflowed with fresh produce, handmade crafts, and local art. I lingered at a table covered in painted pottery. The woman behind it, gray hair tied in a scarf, smiled at me. "Beautiful, aren't they?" she said. "My granddaughter and I make them together." I picked up a small bowl, its glaze shimmering blue and gold. "They're lovely. You must be proud." "Oh, I am," she said with a grin. "It keeps us connected, and it keeps me busy, which at my age is just as important." I bought the bowl not because I needed it, but because I realized how much I admired her words. Connected, busy, purposeful. Walking home with the bowl tucked under my arm, I felt something stir inside me. For years, my purpose had been wrapped entirely in my children. But perhaps there was room for something just mine. That Sunday, when Emily and Michael arrived for our weekly meeting, I felt calmer, lighter. Emily handed me her first paycheck from the dental office, folded neatly in an envelope. Michael showed me a case file he had successfully closed at the firm. But this time, instead of just analyzing their progress, I shared some of my own. I joined Dorothy's book club, I told them, and yesterday I spent the morning at the farmer's market. Emily blinked. "You did something for yourself?" Michael smirked faintly. "Guess miracles do happen." I laughed, a sound freer than it had been in years. Yes, miracles do happen, and I'm realizing that living doesn't stop just because your children grow. It only stops if you let it. They looked at me strangely, as if seeing me not just as their mother, but as a woman in her own right. It was unsettling, but it was also freeing. That evening after they left, I placed the blue and gold bowl on the mantel beside Robert's photograph. For years I had thought my life ended with his, but as the evening sun bathed the room in warm light, I understood something new. Life wasn't ending, it was beginning again. And maybe, just maybe this time, it would be mine. The following weeks unfolded with a rhythm I hadn't known in years. Each Sunday, Emily and Michael arrived with their small victories and setbacks, and each time I found myself less consumed by their struggles and more energized by my own. It began with a notice on the bulletin board at Church Volunteers Needed Community Center Literacy Program. I had walked past dozens of those flyers before, always telling myself I was too busy managing my children's lives. But this time, something inside me said, why not? On Tuesday afternoon, I drove to the old brick building where the center operated. The halls smelled faintly of chalk and coffee, worn but warm. A woman named Susan Miller, the coordinator, greeted me with a smile that reached her tired eyes. "We need people to help adults practice reading," she explained. "Some of them never finish school. Some just need encouragement." I hesitated. I had never seen myself as a teacher. But then I remembered the years I'd spent reading to Emily and Michael at bedtime, turning pages slowly so their little fingers could follow the words. "I can do that," I said simply. The first evening, I sat with a man in his 40s named Carlos, stumbling over a children's book about farm animals. Sweat dotted his forehead, but when he finally read a full sentence without faltering, his grin lit up the room. "See," I told him, clapping softly, "you can do it. You just need someone to believe you can." As he laughed nervously, I realized the truth of my own words. For so long, I had only been the one believing for my children. But here I could believe for others too, and it felt good, so good that I signed up to come back every week. At home, I started noticing changes in myself. The evenings didn't feel empty anymore. I filled them with journal entries, book club discussions, and small projects in the garden. The loneliness that had once clung to me like a heavy coat began to lift. Emily noticed first. During one Sunday check-in, she studied me with wide eyes. "Mom, you're glowing." I laughed. "It's called doing something that feeds your soul, Emily. You should try it." She shifted uncomfortably, then smiled. "Maybe I will. The dental office is offering an evening class in office management. I thought about signing up. That's a wonderful idea, I told her. Do it for yourself, not for Daniel, not for anyone else. Michael raised an eyebrow. And here I thought you'd just become the local saint. I chuckled. Not a saint, just someone finally living. But the biggest surprise came 2 weeks later. Susan pulled me aside after class at the community center. Eleanor, the students have taken a liking to you. We've been thinking of starting a weekend group reading combined with simple life skills. Would you consider leading it? My first instinct was to say no. I wasn't qualified, I wasn't trained. I was just a mother who had stumbled into volunteering. But then I remembered Carlos's grin, Emily's words about me glowing, Michael's teasing tone that carried pride beneath it. Yes, I said slowly, I'll do it. When I told Emily and Michael, their reactions surprised me. You're running a program, Emily asked, eyes wide. Not running, just leading a group, I corrected. Michael leaned back in his chair. Well, looks like we're not the only ones growing up. I smiled at them both. Maybe we're all learning at the same time. Growth doesn't stop at a certain age. For a moment, the three of us sat together in rare harmony. No accusations, no demands, just recognition that each of us was trying, stumbling, and rising again. That night, as I prepared my notes for the first weekend group, I paused at Robert's photograph on the mantel. Do you see this? I whispered. They're changing, and so am I. Maybe this is what you meant when you said they'll never grow strong if I never let them strain. I'm finally letting go. The house no longer felt like a tomb of sacrifices. It felt like a place alive with possibility. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't just surviving without my children's constant needs. I was thriving. The Saturday morning of my first literacy and life skills group, I woke up before the sun. My nerves buzzed like an alarm clock I couldn't shut off. For years, I'd hosted charity luncheons, planned society galas, even orchestrated weddings. But this was different. Those events had always been gilded with money and reputation. This one depended only on me. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing the wrinkles from my blouse. You're not here to impress, I whispered to my reflection. You're here to help. Still, my hands trembled as I packed my bag with notebooks, pencils, and the little blue and gold bowl I had bought at the farmer's market. I wanted something beautiful on the table, a reminder that growth could be ordinary and extraordinary at once. When I arrived at this community center, Susan Miller greeted me with a squeeze of the hand. They're waiting for you, she whispered, nodding toward the small classroom. Inside, 6 faces looked up. Carlos was there, grinning nervously. Beside him sat Maria, a grandmother learning to read so she could follow her granddaughter's texts. Across the room, a young single father named James tapped his pencil on the desk, restless but attentive. Good morning, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm Eleanor, and today isn't about perfection, it's about trying. The group relaxed shoulders, loosening eyes, softening. Slowly we began. We read simple passages aloud, stumbling over words, laughing at mistakes, celebrating every success. I watched Maria's eyes widen when she strung together a full sentence. James chuckled when Carlos mispronounced elephant as elegant, and the whole room burst into laughter that felt warm rather than cruel. Then I pulled out the bowl and placed it in the center of the table. This, I said, is our gratitude bowl. Each week we'll write one thing we're proud of, fold it up, and drop it inside. At the end of our time together, we'll read them all. It's a reminder that even small steps deserve recognition. By the end of the session, slips of paper already filled the bowl. I read a page without stopping. I came even though I was scared. I didn't give up. I drove home that afternoon with a heart lighter than it had been in years. The next day, Emily and Michael arrived for our Sunday check-in. Emily noticed the bowl immediately. What's this? I smiled. Our gratitude bowl, from the community group I led yesterday. Michael raised his brows. You led a group. Yes, I said, pouring tea into 3 cups. 6 people all learning to read more confidently. It wasn't fancy, but it was real. Emily leaned forward, her eyes shining. Mom, that's incredible. You're actually changing lives. Her words startled me. For so long, I had been the one begging them to see my sacrifices. Now, without asking, she saw me. Michael cleared his throat. I guess we weren't the only ones doing homework this week. We laughed together, and for the first time, the sound didn't feel strained. Later that evening, I sat by the window watching the streetlights flicker on. I thought about the 6 faces around that table, about the slips of paper folded neatly in the bowl. I thought about Emily balancing her job with night classes and Michael adjusting his routine at the firm. And I realized something. The real lesson wasn't in punishing them for disrespecting me. It wasn't even in forcing them to grow. The real lesson was in showing them that growth never stops, not at 28, not at 30, not at 58. If they could see me step out of grief and entitlement into purpose, maybe they would believe they could do the same. I whispered into the quiet Robert they're watching me now, not just depending, watching. And maybe that's how they'll learn. I set the bowl gently on the mantel beside his photograph, not as a trophy, but as a reminder life was no longer about what had been lost. It was about what was being built, word by word, choice by choice, Sunday by Sunday. The gratitude bowl filled quickly. Each Saturday the slips of paper grew bolder. At first they were short. I finished a page. I came on time. But by the third week the notes carried hope. I helped my daughter with her homework. I read a prayer at church. I believe I can do this. Watching those slips accumulate was like watching flowers bloom in slow motion. Every folded corner held a piece of courage. One Saturday, as I was setting up the classroom, Emily appeared at the doorway. She was still in her scrubs from the dental office, hair pulled back, cheeks flushed with nerves. "Mom," she whispered, "I thought maybe I could sit in today, just to observe." My heart swelled. Of course. She sat quietly in the back, watching Carlos read aloud with halting pride, watching Maria laugh at her own mistakes, watching James stay late to finish a paragraph. When the session ended, she lingered by the gratitude bowl. "They're incredible," she said softly. "They're fighting for every word. And here I was upset about filing paperwork. Perspective changes everything," I told her. The next week she returned, not to watch, but to help. She sat beside Maria, guiding her finger under each word. She clapped when James managed a full page. By the end of the hour, she slipped her own note into the bowl. I remembered why people matter more than appearances. Michael came later, less willingly. He arrived one Saturday afternoon, still in his suit, muttering that Harrison had piled work on his desk. But when he saw the group gathered around the table, he hesitated. Carlos looked up from his book. "You're her son." Michael cleared his throat. "Yeah, that's me." Carlos grinned. "Then you've got her determination. You'll go far." I watched my son blink in surprise, as if no one outside a polished law office had ever spoken such faith into him. That day, he stayed. He read aloud to the group, his voice steady and confident, showing them how cadence and emphasis could change the meaning of a sentence. When we finished, he admitted quietly, "I'd forgotten what it feels like to learn something just for the joy of it." He too dropped a slip into the bowl. "I want to remember the joy." At home on Sunday, the shift was undeniable. For years, our conversations had revolved around what I could give them: money, advice, protection. Now we talked about what we could give others. Emily shared how Maria reminded her of a patient who always thanked her with a candy bar. Michael talked about James, the single father, and how determined he was to read bedtime stories to his daughter. They weren't just listening anymore. They were connecting. One evening after they left, I sat alone in the garden. The roses Robert had planted were beginning to bloom again, soft petals unfolding against the spring air. I thought of Emily's gentle encouragement, of Michael's steady reading voice, of the way the three of us had once been so fractured, and how service was stitching us together again. Perhaps this was the real revenge, I mused. Not the dramatic cutting off of funds, not the whispered rumors in social circles, but this showing my children what resilience looked like, then letting them taste it themselves. The following Saturday, Emily arrived early with coffee for everyone. Michael stayed late to fix a broken chair. Carlos brought his daughter to meet us, her eyes shining with pride, as he read her a story for the first time. Maria hugged Emily like a granddaughter. James asked Michael for advice about balancing work and parenting. It wasn't just a literacy group anymore, it was a haven. As I watched my children laugh and work beside people they once might have dismissed, I felt Robert's presence like sunlight on my skin. "They're learning," I whispered to the roses, "and so am I." It began with a phone call from Susan at the community center. "Eleanor," she said, her voice bubbling with excitement. "The city is hosting the annual Community Renewal Gala. They're looking for someone to speak about resilience and family transformation. I thought of you immediately. If you're still watching, comment 1 so I know you're still with me." For a moment, I was speechless. Me. The woman whose own children had once called her a pest. The widow who had spent years hiding behind charity luncheons and social facades. "I don't know if I'm the right person," I admitted. "You are," Susan said firmly. "Because you've lived it. That's what people need to hear, not perfection, but truth. The night of the gala arrived sooner than I expected. The ballroom at the downtown Civic Center shimmered with golden light, filled with city officials, teachers, pastors, small business owners, and dozens of volunteers. Rows of chairs faced a stage adorned with nothing more than a podium and a simple banner, "Strengthening families, strengthening community." Emily and Michael insisted on coming. They sat in the third row, Emily in a modest navy dress, Michael in a suit that finally looked like it belonged to him rather than borrowed pride. As I stepped onto the stage, the microphone seemed too tall, the lights too bright. My heart raced like it hadn't in years. I gripped the edges of the podium. "Good evening," I began, my voice wavering before it found steadiness. "My name is Eleanor, and I stand before you tonight not as an expert, not as a perfect parent, but as someone who learned the hard way that love without respect becomes entitlement, and entitlement can destroy families." The room fell silent. Faces leaned in. I told them about Emily's canceled wedding, about Michael's rent-free years, about the moment I realized that my sacrifices had turned into chains around all of us. I spoke of the pain of being called a pest, the sharper pain of being told I was expendable, and the power I discovered in finally saying enough. "But this isn't a story about revenge," I said, my voice growing stronger. "It's a story about rebirth. About realizing that protecting our children doesn't mean shielding them from every consequence. Sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is step back and let their children stumble, because only then will they find their footing." I told them about the literacy group, the gratitude bowl, the way 6 ordinary people taught me that growth is possible at any age. I described the moment Emily guided Maria's finger under the words, the moment Michael read aloud with steady confidence to men and women who cheered him on. My children thought they were losing their safety net, I said. But what they gained was far greater strength, responsibility, and the courage to rebuild. And what I gained was a new life, one not defined by sacrifice alone, but by purpose. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Some stood. Others wiped their eyes. From the stage, I saw Emily's tears glistening in the light, Michael's proud nod, the way they both clapped, not out of obligation, but out of awe. For the first time in years, they weren't just my children, they were my witnesses. Afterward, people crowded around me, teachers thanking me for my honesty, young parents asking for advice, an elderly couple pressing my hands and whispering, "You gave us hope." Emily slipped her arm through mine. "Mom," she whispered, "I've never been so proud to be your daughter." Michael added quietly, "You didn't just teach us, you taught everyone here." That night, back in my quiet living room, I placed the events program beside Robert's photo. I imagined his voice warm and steady. "You did it, Eleanor. You found your voice." And I realized he was right. I hadn't just spoken for myself. I had spoken for every parent who had been overlooked, every adult child who needed to grow, every family clawing its way back to respect. For the first time, my story wasn't just mine. It belonged to all of us. The morning after the gala, I woke to sunlight spilling through the curtains, softer than it had been in months. For once, I didn't feel the weight of dread or the tug of unfinished business. Instead, I felt whole. Emily came over first. She arrived without calling ahead, carrying a bag of pastries from the corner bakery. She set them on my kitchen counter as though she had been doing it her whole life. "I thought you might want breakfast," she said, her voice still carrying that blend of hesitation and hope. I poured us coffee, and we sat at the table, steam rising between us. She fidgeted for a long moment before speaking. "Mom, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you gratitude. I called you names, I dismissed you. I treated you like an obstacle when you were the only one who ever stood in my corner. You didn't just save me when Daniel left, you gave me the chance to see myself clearly. And I don't want to waste that chance." Her eyes brimmed with tears. "Can you ever forgive me?" I reached across the table and took her hand. "Emily, forgiveness isn't a gift you have to earn. It's a choice. And I choose it because holding on to anger keeps both of us trapped. What I want now is not payback, but peace. And peace only grows where forgiveness has been planted." She sobbed into my shoulder, and I held her the way I once held her when she was small, when nightmares kept her awake at night. But this time the nightmare was ending, not beginning. Later that afternoon, Michael arrived. He looked different, tired, yes, but steadier. He carried no arrogance, no swagger, just humility. "Mom," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway, "I heard what Emily told you. I've been selfish too. I took your love and turned it into expectation. I thought providing for us was your duty, not your gift. When I told you I'd rather lose my mother than lose my sister, I didn't just betray you. I betrayed myself. I don't want to be that man anymore. I studied him, my son, who had once seemed so untouchable, now stripped bare of excuses. And who do you want to be, Michael? He swallowed hard. Someone worthy of being your son. Someone my father would be proud of. Someone who builds instead of taking. I stepped forward and embraced him. Then start today. The past is gone, but the future is still yours to shape. And yes, I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because love deserves the last word. He held me tightly, and for the first time in decades, I felt my son's arms not as a demand, but as a promise. That evening, the three of us sat in the living room together. The gratitude bowl rested on the mantel, filled to the brim. We each pulled out a slip at random and read them aloud, laughing at some, crying at others. Emily read one that said, "I came, even though I was scared." She whispered, "That was me too." Michael unfolded one that said, "I didn't give up." He smiled faintly. "Guess that belongs to all of us." When it was my turn, I read a slip that said simply, "I believe I can change." The room went quiet. We didn't need to guess whose it had been, because now it belonged to each of us. As night fell, we walked together into the garden. The roses Robert and I had planted bloomed wildly crimson against the dark. Emily touched a blossom gently. "It's like they're forgiving too," she murmured. "Flowers don't hold grudges," I said. "They just keep growing." Michael nodded. "Maybe that's what we need to do. Grow, not dwell." I looked at my children, the ones who had betrayed my trust, who had taken me for granted, who had forced me into pain I never thought I'd survive. And yet standing there under the stars, I realized they were also the ones who gave me the chance to find my voice, to rediscover myself, to step into a new beginning. That is the paradox of life, isn't it? That betrayal can break us, but it can also wake us. And in the wake, forgiveness blooms. To those of you listening, perhaps you see yourself in this journey. Perhaps you've lived through your own family betrayal stories, moments when the people you love most wounded you the deepest. I want you to know your story doesn't have to end in bitterness. You have the power to reclaim your dignity, to build a life that is truly yours, and yes, even to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It doesn't excuse what was done. But it releases you from carrying poison in your heart. It gives you space to breathe again, to grow again, to live again. As Emily and Michael left that night, they hugged me tightly, promising to come back next week, not for rescue, but for fellowship. I stood in the doorway watching them walk to their car side by side, and I whispered into the night, "Thank you, Robert. We made it." The garden glowed under the moonlight, the roses swaying gently in the breeze, as if nodding in agreement. And I knew then that the final chapter of this story wasn't about revenge at all. It was about forgiveness, the only force strong enough to turn betrayal into blessing and endings into beginnings.